that China is powerful and insecure.
As the feature of rampant misconceptions.
India and China cannot go to war.
That informal summits has its own limitations.
Hello and welcome to India-China Scholars Dialogue. Today my guest is Dr. Sanjeev Kumar. Dr. Kumar is a research fellow at Indian Council for World Affairs. He works on political economy of China, China's foreign and neighborhood policy, and India-China relations. Dr. Kumar is a recipient of prestigious Asia Fellowship Award. He is among few Indian scholars who have conducted their field research in China. Dr. Kumar has been part of various Track 2 dialogues with Chinese think tanks on SCO and BRICS. Welcome to the Scholars Dialogue, Dr. Kumar. As you know, Dr. Kumar, this dialogue is to assess contours of India-China relations and the future prospects. So let me start with a very basic question. India and China being neighbors and developing nations, the status of their relationship is important to each other and the region. However, their relationship is marred with misperceptions, mistrust, and times border conflicts. The border dispute is the most contentious issue between India and China since 1962. But post Rajiv Gandhi's visit in 1988, followed by many bilateral agreements, border issues were somewhat managed for last 30 years, except a few skirmishes here and there. But lately, the border has become rather volatile. So tell us, what is the core of India-China dispute? Is it the border or there is something more to it?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Here I would like to go back to 1950s. I think we need to understand the guiding principles of the bilateral relationship for different phases. In India-China context, we find that there is a rise and fall of guiding principles. For example, in 1950s, Panchsheel was the guiding principles. But we saw that the understanding of Panchsheel or the approaches to Panchsheel was different for both countries. For China, it was more strategic. For India, it was part of a non-aligned policy and also a way of, for example, Prime Minister Nehru thought signing the Panchsheel agreement in 1952, he solved the boundary question with China, which was not the case from Chinese perspective. And we saw that in 1962, a major setback to bilateral relationship, and Panchsheel was from that year, Indian perspective, it lost its relevance, I will say. So that guiding principle was not working in 60s and 70s. We saw the era where 60s was the dark period of bilateral relationship. In 70s and 80s, the rapprochement was done from both sides. And in 1988, we all know the historic visit of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Now, after that, we saw that new principles were introduced from both sides if we go through the official discourses, and that was mutual and equal security. If we go through all documents signed 1993, 1996, 2005, and others, we find that these equal and mutual security was cited guiding principles apart from Panchsheel and other international principles. But in non-official discourse, we find that there is no talk of these principles. This principle, mutual and equal security, we suggest that there should be reciprocal.
You mean to say it was just an understanding?
I am saying that it was on the official discourse, it was all about mutual and equal security, but it could not go beyond official discourse. And that is why I think it's successful again. And strategic issues mainly became important for both countries, and there were competition and divergences on the issue. And later we saw when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping came to power, there is a new terminology used that is called the closer development partnership as a core component of a strategic partnership. Again, we found that if we analyze the closer development partnership, it did not produce desired results. And I think I will stop here.
You know, Indians are intrigued about the Galwan episode. I remember when Modi ji was elected as Prime Minister of India in 2014, the Chinese were very optimistic about India-China relations, especially business cooperation. They knew Mr. Modi as business-friendly leader and about Gujarat model of development. And it showed in China's business activities in India from 2015-16 onwards. Then Doklam happened. India stood its ground and showed that India cannot be taken for granted. Post Doklam, a relationship appears to be normal. Then there was the 2019 informal summit between both leaders, which looked very promising for their relationships. In hindsight, it was just a good optics. And then Galwan happened. So my question is that why did Galwan happen? And also the timing. It was in the middle of COVID, where few countries were blaming China for it. China was in trade war with USA. There was disturbances in Hong Kong and others. So why will China pick a long pending boundary issue with India at such a chaotic time for them?
Yeah, you very nicely narrated the trajectory. Now, in 2014, when President Xi Jinping came to India, and then in 2015, Prime Minister Modi went to China. You must have noticed that in 2014, when he visited Gujarat, he was the first Chinese president or top leader from China after 1962 to get huge public reception in Gujarat. That is a fact. I think that is one conversation Prime Minister Modi also hinted that. So from India also, there was a lot of expectation from President Xi Jinping. And from Chinese side also, you rightly said that they were also hoping. And Chinese also appreciated Prime Minister Modi for various reasons. When he was Gujarat Chief Minister, he had visited already China a few times. And he had this big image of a business facilitator or a leader who can take decisive decisions on important issues. But when President Xi was in India, you noticed that there was a border issue, and Prime Minister Modi had to convey this to him. I think that was a turning point as far as the relationship. I will say not the turning point, but a turning point, because it gave suspicion to the leadership. There are the limitations of.
You mean to say that when President Xi was visiting Gujarat, there were some skirmishes at the border, which resulted in some kind of a mistrust about China in India?
Yeah, I will say that it created mistrust. And from Indian perspective, I think even before Prime Minister Modi, there is no change. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also made it clear on various occasions that peace and tranquility at the border is most important for India. And if it is going to be disturbed, then it will certainly disturb the whole relationship. So I think President Xi visited in India and the border incident happened. Although it was both sides were able to come up with the statement and they resolved the issue, but it created a mistrust. I'm saying it created a mistrust, but after that, if we analyze the relationship, I think both the visits were very successful. The Chinese President Xi visits to India, 14, then Prime Minister Modi visit to China, and we saw the kind of reception Prime Minister Modi got in China, or the statement he gave on various issues. That was certainly a reason for optimism. And also on business terms, when President Xi came here, even the joint statement was termed closer development partnership, and there was a talk of $20 billion investment from China. Now, in latter years, if we analyze after 5 years of the visit, or what is called after 5 years of closer development partnership, a new terminology in bilateral relations, I think we found that there were a lot of issues on which China could not fulfill its commitment or its promise. For example, the 20 billion investment, we know that the investment from Chinese side is even today, even the whole cumulative investment is around $8 billion. And the promise was from President Xi was $20 billion in next 5 years. Even on the bilateral trade, of course, we found that there was an increase in bilateral trade, and it was a very significant increase. But on issues India had reservations, especially the market access issue. There was hardly any progress. Even there were various visits. Even President Pratibha Patil visited China, and before that also the issue was raised. There was no concrete results from Chinese side. So the on issues, for example, IT, pharma, and agriculture, on which India has expertise, there was no market access issues were not resolved. So this worked as an impediment for the bilateral relationship. Here, I would say Wuhan worked very well because after the Wuhan informal summit, there are a lot of progress on market access issues. And but unfortunately, the Galwan incident has created a stage when things are not normal.
But why Galwan happened?
Now, this is very difficult question. Why Galwan happened? I can just make a few arguments. We know that the Chinese first mobilized huge number of army personnel at the border. And this was violation of 1993 agreement, 1996 agreement.
The Galwan incident we know, but we fail to understand the reason. Even if China has ambition to be the regional leader or be a superpower or play an important role in world affairs, to achieve all that, India could be an important partner for China. So why would China antagonize India?
I think there are some issues on a strategic front. I will term it as aspirations of both countries. Of course, China has this aspiration or it's a declared ambition. If you go by the 19th Party Congress document, I think the message which comes out clearly is China has arrived on the stage, and you rightly talked about it. And various statements have also endorsed it. For example, include the Belt and Road Initiative also. My point of view is strategic and economic projects to get the global, to acquire the global ambition of China. But here, India had not supported it, primarily because there is a sovereignty issue involved in CPEC, also because on issues like NSG or even issues earlier like the terrorism issue, India was not getting enough support from China. And it gave the impression in India that China is not supporting India's right. I think that is why there is a perception that there is also an understanding that China favors a hierarchical foreign policy or international relations in which India's importance is very less than what is India aspired to do. So a whole lot of things created mist.
Do you think India getting closer to the USA making China rather uncomfortable?
So if we go by the Chinese discourse or the writings of Chinese scholars, it certainly I think they indicate that they are very uncomfortable with India getting closer with US. But the fact remains that China also had a very good relationship with the US. And even when there was a time when US relationship with Russia was bad, at that time also China maintained good relations with US. And that used them, and that was and China was benefited by that relationship in terms of economic and technology. So from that logic, I think if India has a good relationship with US, I think that should not be issue from Indian perspective.
As you say, China is uncomfortable with India getting closer to the USA. Similarly, is India also concerned about China's growing influence in South Asia? Will it affect India's relationship with its neighbors?
I think China's profile in South Asia has certainly increased. This is a fact. Analyze it in terms of economic and other facts. But we also have to understand that Chinese foreign policy in South Asia has increasingly been influenced by domestic factors. And here I would like to mention two issues. One is Tibet and other is Xinjiang. Now we know that the issue of Tibet has become very important with the rise of China, and that is why either with India or with Nepal, this has been an important issue. The second, the issue of Xinjiang is again is related to or will have an impact on its relations with Afghanistan and Pakistan, and ETIM is an issue when they deal with these two countries. So with the rise of China or economic rise of China, certainly China is more assertive on these issues. That these are the issue of national security and development for China or the security of their Western region. And that is why in recent past, if, for example, you are talking about Nepal, I think the central issue from my perspective in China-Nepal relation is the issue of Tibet. Also, if we analyze the visits of some PLA officials, we find that this is a very important issue, and the people living there as a refugee. These two issues have increasingly driven the Chinese foreign policy in South Asia. From India's perspective, I will say that India has a very particular or very special relationship with individual countries. And if we analyze, for example, in Nepal, we have a very special relationship. Also in Bangladesh, if we analyze in recent past, we have invested a lot and the relationship has also been very important. Of course, India needs to do some more things in terms of project clearance and project building in different countries. But India follows a demand-driven process, consultative process. And here, India has the advantage over Chinese model of investment. And Chinese model of investment, it has received many protests in some parts of the world. And we found that they bring everything from their country to the recipient country, labor, equipment, capital, and it goes again to the Chinese company. So therefore, it creates some kind of disenchantment with the local people or local people because they do not necessarily hire local people. On the other hand, India's approach is demand-driven and consultative, and it focuses on capacity building and other issues. So it has advantage over the Chinese model of investment. But of course, India is engaged in.
But you know, Dr. Kumar, economic engagements have become an important part of international relations. China is using its financial and industrial might in its international relations very effectively. India does not have that economic might as yet. Also, its economic policies are becoming more inward-looking. How will it affect our relations, especially with our neighbors?
Well, you are factually correct that Chinese economy is more than 5 times than the India's economy. RCEP has a different dimension, and RCEP, you know, the reservations from the India, and I think Indian side thought that the bad deal is, I think no deal is better than bad deal. I think this has not impacted India's trade with, because we have bilateral arrangements with many of these important countries, even in South Asia or in Southeast Asia. But on India's economic performance, of course, COVID has affected very negatively. But hopefully the recovery will also be very strong.
What do you think of India not joining BRI, Belt and Road Initiative?
No, I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was a very right decision. There are 2-3 reasons for that. One is, of course, the sovereignty issue is involved for India, and no country will ignore that issue. And China was not sensitive or has not been sensitive to the CPEC of India's concern. Apart from that, India raised a number of issues. For example, the issue of transparency, the issue of environment sustainability of projects, the issue of financial responsibility, and I would like to compare BRI with other Chinese initiatives like AIIB. Now, why I am doing it? Because when it comes to AIIB, China first floated the idea, and then there were discussions with the member countries or prospective member countries for 2 years, and then they came up with this MOU, and the AIIB was established. So before the establishment of AIIB, it took consultative process which lasted around 2 years, and then in a multilateral spirit, and they agreed on all principles, all professional principles of international law, transparency, environmental issues, and other professional issues. You know, India is a founding member of AIIB, and it has played for the success of AIIB. In BRI, you find totally different approach. It was a Chinese project. Chinese project means nobody was consulted before the announcement of BRI. as a researcher, found we find that in 2012, when experts or strategists like Wang Qixi were talking about march towards march westwards and other strategic issues, I think from there it emerged. Although means BRICS has a larger vision, but I'm just quoting the strategic issues raised by Wang Qixi also influenced BRICS. And BRICS was a Chinese. Even now we see that they are trying to have many agreements with on bilaterally on different countries. For example, the issue of debt or debt sustainability was a big issue during first and second BRI forum. But the solution which they came out was bilateral agreement with the countries, bilateral agreement with finance ministry and other member state finance ministry. So I'm saying that it is more a Chinese project rather than a multilateral project, which was announced without any consultation, and there are issues of transparency and other international law.
But more than 150 countries have joined BRI. It is a huge economic initiative of more than $1 trillion. CPEC is the reason for India not to join BRI. I don't know if there was a way to circumvent CPEC to join it, but almost all countries with whom India enjoys a long-term political, social and business relationship have joined BRI. Do you think BRI might influence our relationship with those countries who are now part of BRI?
BRI is not a charity project at all, but I am saying that it's a project on which China is going to create market and China is going to get benefit from this market. If you go by various studies, you'll find that the Chinese companies are getting benefited from this project. You also have to understand one thing. For example, even BRI is a signature project of President Xi Jinping, who is the paramount leader in China, and that is why you will find various how to tackle or how to improve data on BRI. That one has to also study. For example, there are various projects. Even if you study Central Asian countries, even before BRI, the projects were completed by China or the ongoing projects in Central Asian countries by China, and they all given a name of BRI. So although their old projects were also included in BRI, so now I don't know, everything is the bracket of BRI.
Now that the Quad has been revived, do you think the Quad and now Quad Plus is viable or feasible? China takes Quad as Asian NATO. So how Quad will impact India's position in other regional groupings, such as BRICS and SCO?
Quad, I think, gives a message to China that there are problems and China needs to have dialogue with countries concerned. Of course, there is issues of maritime sovereignty or maritime issues on which China has been assertive. And that is why I think Quad gives a message to China. It will be countered by such group. So the message is clear, of course, for China. Now, the issue whether this is going to impact the other institutions, multilateral institutions, I don't think so, but I'm not very sure. I think it will not impact cooperation under other organizations such as BRICS and SCO. They all are, for example, on BRICS, also India is contributing very significantly along with other countries, and they all recognize India's importance in BRICS. There are various initiatives taken by India in innovation, in agriculture, which benefiting all countries. In SCO also, I think the inclusion of both India and Pakistan has been very positive, participated in some of the forums, and all member states, without any reservations, have accepted or has welcomed India's role in SCO. And I think India is also India also value its relations within the framework of SCO. And from that perspective, I don't find that there will be any kind of curtailing relationship from Indian perspective or from the other side. So I see these two as a separate initiative. Quad certainly has given a message to China, and China needs to understand the message. I'm saying the issue of maritime security, issue of rule-based order, freedom of navigation, all are important, and I think China should give importance to these issues and to have a dialogue with Quad. I think that will.
Tell me, with the current situation and uncertainties about India-China relations, how do you see India-China relations in near future?
Yeah, I think Galwan was a major setback. There is no doubt. The kind of public perception in India has emerged after the killing of soldiers. But I think, and there is a huge mistrust between the two countries. So I think trust needs to be rebuilt. Both countries need to take a long-term view of the relationship. Here, I will suggest a lot of conflict on the issue of what is called core interest. Now, I will suggest there should be some serious discussion or serious dialogue, even at two level or even at the higher level, on each other's core interest. In 2018, I remember a statement by President Xi Jinping at SCO forum in Qingdao. Countries should accommodate each other core interests. So I think that statement was very important, but I have not seen any further development or further statement like that. So there should be some dialogue on India's core interest and also.
Dialogue at what level? Militaries are talking to each other. External affairs are talking to each other. National security advisors are in dialogue with each other. Then at what level the dialogue will be fruitful for both?
No, see, this I am suggesting, for example, this is a basic issue I found that both countries are unable to accommodate each other's core interests. So the normal principle is certainly both should be sensitive to each other, both should respect each other. But unless and until there is some consensus on each other's core interest or accommodating core interest, I think the relationship might not go forward.
Do you think there is a need for another Wuhan or Chennai, or it can be handled at the lower level?
See, the current situation in India, I don't find any scope or any possibility of Wuhan-like meeting. I think first both countries need to rebuild trust through various means. This is the 70th anniversary of India-China. Yeah. Last year was the 70th. It lasted till 31st of March. Both countries had planned a number of issues, actually 70 commemorative events.
You know why I am saying it? Because our Ministry of External Affairs has stated that they do not want to engage in any other discussion unless there is a status quo ante. On the other hand, Chinese believe that whatever partial withdrawal has been done, it is final. So it seems there is no scope for any further discussion, for any move to go forward.
No, I think this is a very important issue. See, the Chinese are saying, the ministry as well as their scholars, that you need to decouple the bilateral relations from the border issue. Yeah. Now you will understand from Indian perspective, this is not possible. Means I was quoting Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also in China, in India, the various statements, Prime Minister Modi also, that the border issue is a prerequisite for the overall development of bilateral relations, and is going to affect the bilateral relationship. Border is peace and tranquility at border is disturbed. So in Galwan, facts suggest that Chinese first violated the 1993 agreement, 1996 agreement, and other agreements like 2005 agreement by mobilizing large number of force at the border. And even in February, we came to know that the disengagement started. There are various reports suggesting that it's not going very well. The Chinese are not cooperating with what they had. Although there is no specific report, but these are the media reports I am quoting. So as it was declared in February that the disengagement at all fiction points, I think the development of disengagement will shape the bilateral relationship to a great extent. Because if the disengagement does not go as planned, then again it will be difficult times for the bilateral relationship.
So you are saying that now the ball is in Chinese court.
Yeah, I think
it will be
China has
agree
to the status
develop
quo
that
until
trust.
then things
this is what I am saying, that China has to show sincerity. China has to show sincerity in terms of the border disengagement until and unless they go back to the April 2020 situation. I think there will be it will be very difficult for Indian side, knowing the public perception and also knowing the fact that schools were violated. And of course, I think after that, both countries need to rebuild trust for longer term relationship.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. It was a
Dr.
really
Sanjeev.
pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.